Hey, 42 here. In early 2015, a group of amateur astronomers were poring over data from NASA's Kepler Space Telescope when they noticed something strange. Located in the constellation Cygnus, about 1,400 light years from Earth, was a star that appeared to be blinking. It isn't unusual for the luminosity of a star to vary over time, but the light from this particular star was changing in ways that just didn't make any sense. Not only were the fluctuations unprecedentedly huge, at one point the star grew dimmer by more than 20%, seemingly at random, it was also the pattern of these fluctuations, or should I say the complete lack of a pattern. There are several natural phenomena that can alter the amount of light from a distant star that reaches Earth. Internal processes in the star can change its brightness over time, or a large object like a planet might physically block some of the light from reaching us. But the fluctuations of this star were like nothing ever observed before. They were too extreme, too random. And this wasn't the only oddity. After examining historical records, astronomers noticed the star had been slowly dimming over a period of at least a century. Something that should have been impossible for a star of this age and type. It was almost as though the star's energy was slowly being siphoned off. As everyone with a passing interest in astronomy turned their telescopes towards this celestial anomaly, scientists around the world tried to answer the question on everyone's lips: what the hell was going on? Sherlock Holmes once said, "When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." Since astronomers couldn't explain the wild fluctuations and strange fading of this mysterious star by any natural processes known to man, how about an unnatural one? Was it possible that an advanced alien civilization hidden away in our galaxy had built a megastructure so vast it could obscure a star? Was this the first tangible evidence of intelligent life out there in the cosmos? Let's find out. If you feel like you're drifting in the endless void of space with no direction in your life, sometimes flickering brightly like a star, but other days you feel like there's a black hole inside of you from which there's no escape, then you probably have a lot of questions that you need answering. Maybe it's about your relationship, your work, or something else entirely. Well, the paid partner of today's video, BetterHelp, will connect you with a therapist who can help you find answers to some of these questions. Simply fill out a questionnaire and you'll be matched with a therapist. And you can easily switch therapists at any time at no extra cost if it's not quite the right fit. They carefully make sure therapists on their platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Going to therapy is a sign of strength, not weakness. And whether you need help with your relationship or guidance on which path to take next in your life's journey, BetterHelp is there for you, so you don't have to feel alone in the darkness of space any longer. Don't let yourself drift alone. Let BetterHelp be your guiding star. Click the link in the description below or go to betterhelp.com/42 and get 10% off your first month of therapy. The Kepler Space Telescope launched in 2009 with a simple but bold mission: to hunt down planets orbiting distant stars.
And liftoff of the Delta II rocket with Kepler on a search for planets in some way like our own.
It did that using something called transit photometry, which involves analysing the light curves of hundreds of thousands of stars in search of the telltale dips in brightness that we see when a planet passes directly between us and its parent star. The Kepler mission was incredibly successful. During its 9 years of operation, it identified over 2,500 exoplanets orbiting distant star systems. But all of those planets produced a mountain of data, far too much for NASA astronomers to process on their own. And so they called in hundreds of so-called citizen scientists, amateur astronomers from around the world, to help them out. Collectively known as planet hunters, it was these citizen scientists who first noticed the incredibly strange behaviour of a star with the rather snappy name KIC 8462852. According to Kepler data, this strange star dimmed by as much as 22% at seemingly random intervals, sometimes for several days at a time. To call this behaviour unusual would be an understatement of galactic proportions. Kepler observed over 150,000 stars during its decade-long mission, and not a single one of them showed a light curve that even remotely resembled KIC 8462852. The readings were so unusual that, at first, Planet Hunters project lead Dr. Tabby assumed there must have been some kind of mistake. Kepler was known to experience the odd glitch every now and then, and the light curve of this particular star looked like it must be one of them. But when a thorough check of the data processing pipeline didn't throw up any red flags, Tabitha and her team had no choice but to accept that this was no error. Something was making this strange star, known today as Tabby's star in Dr. Bayajian's honor, blink and flash like the lights on a Christmas tree. The question is, what was it? Theory 1. A large planet. Now let's get the most obvious explanation out of the way first. The Kepler's mission's entire goal was to find exoplanets by identifying the dimming events caused by a transiting planet. So, could Tabby's star's strange light curve be caused by a large exoplanet? Whilst it makes sense on the surface, Dr. Bayajian and her team were able to dismiss this theory almost immediately. A typical planetary transit dims the brightness of your average star by a minuscule amount. Even a very large planet like Jupiter would only dim Tabby's star, which is about 50% bigger than our Sun, by a single percent. To block a whopping 22% of Tabby's light, a planet would have to be impossibly enormous, and I mean that quite literally. You see, there's an upper limit to how big planets can get. At about 13 times the mass of Jupiter, the pressure inside a planet's core would be great enough to fuse hydrogen into deuterium. And the planet that's fusing hydrogen into deuterium isn't a planet at all. It's a star. Well, sort of. Technically, it's a brown dwarf, a failed star that never graduated to fully fledged star status on account of it being too runty to achieve big boy star hydrogen to helium fusion. If a brown dwarf was causing Tabby's star's dimming events, we would know about it, because unlike planets, brown dwarfs are visible to Earth-based telescopes in the infrared spectrum. In other words, the large planet theory is a total bust. Theory number 2, dust. Another common reason that stars may appear to dim when viewed from Earth is good old-fashioned space dust. Young solar systems are full of the stuff. That's what all the planets and moons are eventually made from. If there was a big, thick, protoplanetary dust disk swirling around Tabby's star, it could conceivably block enough light to cause those weird dimming events. The trouble is, protoplanetary disks are only found in young solar systems, and Tabby is no spring chicken. The star, not the scientist. That would just be rude. Protoplanetary disks are also invariably warm, at least by cosmic standards, and therefore, like brown dwarfs, if one was there, we should be able to see evidence of it in the infrared spectrum. And we don't. Theory number 3, comets. With the obvious ideas out of the way, Dr. Bayajian and her team had to get creative. Their first genuine hypothesis was put forward in the excellently titled 2016 paper KIC 8462852, Where's the Flux? That's WTF for short. According to the paper, an unusually large swarm of comets was responsible for Tabby's distinctive dimming. In truth, it sounded pretty far-fetched even then, but it was a best of a bad bunch kind of situation. And at least, in theory, it was possible. A big, irregular swarm of comets could, theoretically, have blocked large chunks of light at seemingly random intervals. The trouble was, to block more than 20% of the light from Tabby's star, the comet's swarm would have needed to have been mind-breakingly enormous, containing hundreds of thousands of comets, amounting to the mass of several entire planets, and that just wasn't realistic. And sheer scale wasn't the only problem with the comet theory. About a year after the WTF paper was published, a follow-up study uncovered something else unusual about Tabby's star. It's gradually getting dimmer. According to one study, historical data going back to the late 19th century suggests the star had decreased in brightness by about 20% in the last 100 years. And even the significantly more reliable Kepler data showed an overall dimming of about 3% during the first 4 years of the mission. Even if there was the comet swarm equivalent of Godzilla prowling around Tabby's star, it wouldn't explain this gradual dimming. Theory number 4. Aliens. Okay, if the little bit out there theories aren't cutting the mustard, we may as well just move on to the fun one. What about aliens? Astronomers are usually pretty reluctant to cry alien when they come across interstellar phenomena that they don't understand, because when they do, they invariably end up looking a bit stupid. From pulsars to quasars, all the weird stuff we found in the darkest corners of the universe has turned out to have a perfectly normal and natural explanation. But Tabby's star was such an extreme outlier that aliens did it was actually starting to look like a pretty good bet. The idea, first proposed by astrophysicist Jason Wright, was that the irregular dimming of Tabby's star could be caused by a massive artificial structure like a Dyson sphere, or possibly a Dyson swarm, built by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. A Dyson sphere, for the uninitiated, is a hypothetical alien megastructure designed to capture a star's energy. I did a whole video on the topic if you're interested to find out more. If such a structure were partially built, or in the case of a Dyson swarm, potentially fully built but unevenly distributed, it could explain the bizarre, non-repeating dips in Tabby's star's brightness. Almost as soon as someone mentioned the A word, media outlets around the world lost their collective shit, printing sensational headlines touting the alien megastructure theory. But it wasn't just excitable journalists who took the idea seriously. The SETI Institute was convinced enough to point the Arran telescope array at Tabby's star for a full 2 weeks to scan for alien radio signals. The results came back negative, but that didn't necessarily count the alien megastructure hypothesis out. A civilization advanced enough to build a Dyson sphere might well have left radio-based communication far behind them. Unfortunately, further research ultimately did count the alien megastructure hypothesis out, at least for the most part. The research, which kind of awesomely was funded by a Kickstarter campaign, saw a global network of telescopes focused on Tabby's star 24/7 for an entire year. The result was a paper published in 2018 that offered a new insight into several significant dimming events. The paper confirms that something was preventing light from Tabby's star from reaching Earth, but it also revealed a critical clue. Whatever it was wasn't blocking all wavelengths of light equally. Shorter wavelengths were blocked much more strongly than longer ones. And that was a problem, at least for anyone hoping for first contact. If there was an alien megastructure orbiting Tabby's star, or any solid object for that matter, it would uniformly and completely block all wavelengths of light. The fact that shorter wavelengths were preferentially blocked suggested we were dealing not with a single large object, but trillions upon trillions of tiny ones. In other words, dust. Now I know what you're thinking, didn't we already rule that one out? Well, yes, but it turns out space dust comes in more flavours than your local ice cream parlour. The dust blocking Tabby's star isn't part of a thick protoplanetary disk for the reasons we've already covered. A star of Tabby's age shouldn't have one, and if it did, we'd be able to see it in the infrared spectrum. Instead, scientists believe that Tabby's star is surrounded by a huge volume of very fine, diffuse, and cold dust. Fine space dust will scatter shortwave radiation, whilst longer wavelengths, including infrared, will pass right through it, hence the lack of an excess infrared signal from the star system. A large, irregularly shaped cloud of this very fine dust could easily explain the short-term dips. And if the dust is slowly accumulating, it could even explain the long-term dimming too. But it isn't quite case closed just yet. If this space dust isn't part of a protoplanetary disk, where did it come from? The short answer is, we still don't really know. There are plenty of theories, but none of them perfectly explains all the oddities we've witnessed over the years. One of the best comes from a scientific paper published in 2019. It postulates that the mystery dust is coming from the slow destruction of a kidnapped moon that ended up in close orbit around Tabby's star after being gravitationally stolen from its parent planet. The theory, backed up by extensive computer modelling, is that at some point in the relatively recent past, a planet on a highly eccentric orbit got a bit too close to Tabby's star and, for want of a better word, was basically eaten. One of that planet's moons then ended up in a stable but very close orbit around the star, where it is slowly being evaporated, leaving a colossal trail of dust and debris in its wake. It's a solid theory, especially since it helps explain both the short-term dips and the long-term dimming. If Tabby's star devoured an entire planet, it would have caused a temporary brightening, and the slow dimming we're witnessing today could simply be things returning to normal levels. The dust and debris from the evaporating moon would then explain the short-term irregular dips. So far, so good. But the theory has one major flaw, and it's one that's come up several times in this video already. Where's the infrared signal? We're talking about catastrophic cosmic events here. We'd expect to see some evidence of them in the infrared spectrum, but there isn't any. Or at least none that we've been able to detect so far. There's also the fact that, whilst certainly possible, scientists believe an event of this nature would be incredibly rare. The fact that we happened to catch one in a sample size of 150,000 stars is like winning the cosmic lottery. With an estimated 100 billion stars in the Milky Way alone, that would imply there are millions of similar events happening right now in our galaxy, orders of magnitude more than astronomers would expect. Of course, the odds don't necessarily work that way. It could simply be that we did get lucky and happened to point the Kepler telescope at a star experiencing a 1,000,000,000-to-1 event. Or the entire theory might be completely wrong. Another idea is that the dust isn't actually orbiting Tabby's star at all. Instead, it could be floating in the vast expanse of interstellar space, somewhere between us and the star. This theory is particularly appealing because an irregular cloud of varying but overall increasing density passing between us and the star could potentially explain everything. The deep dips, the lack of a clear pattern, and even the long-term dimming. It all seems to fit. Almost. But it turns out that Tabby's star's so-called irregular dimming events might not be so irregular after all. They're just far enough apart that we didn't spot them at first. With more time observing the star, some astronomers believe a rough 4 and a bit year cycle has begun to emerge. And if all of this weirdness is being caused by an interstellar dust cloud completely independent of Tabby's star system, we'd expect to see no such pattern at all. There's also the fact that an interstellar dust cloud ought to affect other stars in the region, and so far it seemed like only Tabby was invited to this stellar disco. So, where does all of this leave us? Well, as of today, scientists are confident that dust in some shape or form is responsible for the anomaly that is Tabby's star. But exactly where that dust is coming from, and even where exactly it is, remains uncertain. And whilst there are still uncertainties, there remains at least a few faint hopes that aliens might be involved somehow. Might a hyper-advanced alien race have built a Dyson swarm out of dust-sized nanobots around Tabby's star? Maybe. Or more likely, there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this, and we just haven't figured it out yet. Thanks for watching. Just a quick word to say that I couldn't make these videos without the support of my Patreon members. Consider joining the exclusive 42 Discord community by supporting me on Patreon. It's a great place to discuss my videos with like-minded individuals and myself. The link's in the description, but if you don't want to, or you can't join my Patreon, then please don't worry. A simple like or comment to say thanks would also put a huge smile on my face. Thank you.